Welcome to The State of Us.
Beyond mainstream cable news and party lines, with a millennial and a boomer, The State of Us pushes past the noise and uncovers all the issues that matter.
Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
America is in terrible danger. In terrible danger. Well, there's also a counter to that. America could use a good fight. These are two opposing sides from the New York Times Sunday Review section entitled America is Ungovernable. And so you've got two kind of opposing opinions here, right? The one is America is in terrible danger. This isn't groupthink or hysteria. Our democracy is at stake. And then you've got the counterpoint. America could use a good fight. From the courts to Congress, the U.S. is more resilient than you think. We're going to break down both of these arguments. Lance has thoroughly investigated them, gone over each with a fine-tooth comb, and is ready to present you with the key arguments from each. So we'll kind of examine each one, cross-examine them, if you will. And we'll be sure to bring Devon in throughout the show as well today to get his thoughts. And then in the third segment, we'll tell you who we agree with more, or maybe if there's another angle that we should consider. But of course, we could not begin a conversation on the future of this country without
TrueChat senior historian and an educator of more than 30 years. Here is your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
They were two very interesting articles, and I can't wait to get into it and talk about it because it is two very different outlooks, but they're the two prevailing outlooks that we all see no matter what news show or newspaper or magazine or online articles that we read. We're seeing these two thoughts played out. So I think it touches on the fabric of American politics right now. Just for transparency, I'll be talking to Hey Arnold off air and trying to throw his views in as well.
I wish our audience could see, Lance, the setup we've got here. There's a guest on today's show. Unfortunately, they will be mute. There is what I would consider, I guess, a life-size Hey Arnold from the cartoon TV show, sitting next to Lance today. So he came down from Lance's home office into Lance's home studio and is observing the show today. So just so everybody knows, he's here in spirit, but he can't speak. So he's being very well behaved. Usually Lance or I would make this decision, but I think we'll leave it up to Devon today. Which argument he wants to hear first. You've got America is in terrible danger, or America could use a good fight. Which one do you want to hear about first?
That is a tough one, mostly because they're both sound very interesting.
You can defer to Hey Arnold if you're uncertain.
No, I don't think I need his help with this, mostly because I feel like we should know why we're in danger and then why we should fight, if that makes any sense.
Oh, okay. Interesting. So, Lance, tell us, America's in terrible danger. What's Frank Bruni, the author of this opinion piece, what's he trying to get at here? What's the key arguments?
Basically, he's saying that he thinks the country is going to go down the tubes very quickly, that he thinks that the divide that faces the country, whether it's over the nomination of a new Supreme Court justice or whether it's the president saying that if the election doesn't go his way, he might not leave office peacefully. His racist overtones, as the author sees them, furthering the divide in America. He sees us as a fear that he's never felt before, that we might fall off the precipice and into the water, never to recover as the nation that we have been in the past.
He says at one point, Lance, quote, tribal, identity politics, fake news, and hoax are now mainstays of our vocabulary, indicative of a world where facts and truth are suddenly relative. Yours may contradict mine, eroding any common ground and preventing any consensus. Yes, there were conspiracy theories and there was vicious, ugly feuding before. There were duels, but there was no Facebook or Twitter to accelerate the sorting of people into ideological cliques and to pour accelerant on the fires of their suspicion and resentment. Now, that particular statement, Lance, I think he's raising some excellent points there, right? Because those are things that
Sure.
you and I have talked
Yes.
about. That one of the biggest problems and one of the big dangers, right? Danger facing America is this tribalism and this identity politics, right? That we don't share common facts. So if that's the basis, right, of this argument, what do you see as the issue, though, with the argument? Because, I mean, that to me sounds pretty good, right? I'm pulling out this snippet here that sounds nice. But what's the counter to this? Because it does sound like he's raising the alarm bell, right? The possibility of, the election being contested and everything's going to go down the drain and there's no way we could get through it. What's the other side of this from your standpoint? I mean, we're going to hear about America needing a good fight, but what do you think we should be taking into consideration here?
Danger, Will Robinson. That's from Lost in Space. But anyway.
I know. I've seen the remake that Netflix has.
Well, there you go. I didn't even know I was so woke. I was referring to the old show. No, the counter to that is very simply America's been through this before. We've talked many times about the hyperbole of the news media these days and how this is the first time, this is the worst. We have never been through something like this before. And that's just not true. There have been many times when we have disagreed. I mean, we even fought a civil war. And you say, are you saying we're going to fight a civil war? I'm saying, I don't know if we're going to fight a civil war. What I'm saying is this isn't the worst times we've ever seen and we've come back from it. I'm just picking that one out. So when I read these authors who say, oh my gosh, we've gone too far, it's all over, we can't stop it, I think that's the counter. That's the main counter, is that, yeah, things aren't good. And yes, Facebook and Twitter and social media has given a voice to people that normally weren't heard, that are allowed to express their viewpoints, and other people feel the need to latch onto it because they either haven't heard it before or they were too afraid, oh, I'm the only one who thinks this. Hey, there's other people out there that think like me, so I can latch onto this now, and we're a group and we have a common thread. All of that is true, but to say that's the doom and gloom of the country because we've never experienced anything like that before, I think is a misnomer and a hyperbole, and I think that's the major counter to that. So I'm not arguing that it doesn't happen, but I'm countering the fact that it doesn't have to lead to doom and gloom. Does it make it a tough obstacle to overcome? Okay, but that's America, right? That's America's spirit, is that when we get a tough obstacle, we just don't throw our hands up and say, oh my gosh, it's all over. So
you're hearing right, obviously, for those that didn't pick up on it in the intro, Lance is our resident boomer, right? Mm-hmm. We've got myself, a millennial. Millennials are often children of boomers. And then, of course, we've got our producer who is a super old Gen Z, but nonetheless, technically Gen Z. And I want to get Devon's reaction to that. I'm going to read something here. So this is, again, from the article in the Times, which, of course, are linked at thestateofus.org, as always. So you guys read this for yourself, right? That's a big part of the State of Us. But we encourage you to look it up. Frank Bruni, Lance, goes on to say, Democrats will cite that wickedness to justify the shattering of precedents in the future. Ugliness begets ugliness until what? The whole thing collapses of its own ugly weight? And who the hell are we anymore? The world's richest country has been brought pitifully low. We just recently passed the mark of 200,000 deaths related to the coronavirus, something our status as the global leader by far on that front. How's that for exceptionalism?
I will say that I kind of feel where he is coming from there. I do have a lot of, disappointment in how my country is handling things, especially when relating to the pandemic that's currently going on. But in these other aspects, I mean, I feel like we're kind of lacking there as well, and that we should make some changes, but I really don't think that it's the end of the world. I think everything can be fixed. It's just enough of us need to want to put in the effort to do that.
So not that you speak for your entire generation, but Lance and I have had some conversations with Bradley too, our editing producer, who used to also be our recording producer. And some of the feelings that we get from Gen Z as a whole, I mean, it's not to say there aren't people, because, you know, we've got somebody else that works at True Chat that I think is very much your kind of traditional, very patriotic, right, American. But I don't get the feeling, Lance, that from a lot of Gen Z, that's how, that there's a more cynical view, perhaps, of the country. Is that fair, Devon? And the people that you know that you went to school with, do you feel like on the whole, there's a slightly more, maybe cynical is not the right word, but not as positive outlook?
Dark humor.
Dark humor.
I actually read something once that was, I can't remember, so long ago, but mentioned that like in my generation with Gen Z, there is a lot of dark humor, and that's how we cope with a lot of things, because we have seen this before, mostly after like the Great Depression. People had a lot of dark humor characteristics, and that after what came after. So I feel like it's something like in our childhood, like 9/11, for instance, like a lot of my generation either never got to experience or see anything about it. So I think it's more of like just trying to cope with these awful things that happen that we see every day. And it's just how my generation wants to move on with it and, you know, hold it in, I guess.
Or is it a failing of our society and our school system of not giving that generation the toolbox that's necessary to deal with the hardships that are the human life? Because it has been the same. So, I mean, you know, and are we stereotyping a generation by saying that? Not that there aren't people that feel that way, but there are people that use dark humor in every generation. But I think with young people,
yes,
one of my contentions is that we as a society have not given you the tools from which to deal with many of the dark situations that you have been faced with. And so therefore you use dark humor because you don't know what else to use, because we haven't given you anything else to use. And
that is exactly right.
And that's a failing from the adults, is that we've protected you and been helicopter parents and never let you go out and play on your own because we were worried of child molesters or abductions. And so you never created any independence and solved any problems on your own to where you felt confident that when faced with a struggle, or our nation is faced with a struggle, you don't see any hope or any way to solve it because you've never been allowed to solve your own problems. We've protected you from that. So just another thought out there. I'm not saying you're wrong. I think you're probably pretty close to being, pretty correct, spot on. But I think it's a failing of society that's made you that way, not your own volition. That's just the way you've had to learn to deal with it, because we haven't given you other ways to deal with it and to see any other outcome as a possibility.
I really like how you worded that, especially with like parenting and everything. I mean, I feel like my generation has had more like of a hovering over, but mostly since with like all of social media and everything, I mean, it kind of feels like this is also new. What do we do? I mean, I couldn't imagine being a parent and having all this come up when, they never had that. And there's so many different situations and stipulations. It's hard to just put it on one thing, but I feel like you are correct in that sense. And that does have a lot to play into it, I feel like.
So we've talked about America is in terrible danger, maybe in more ways than one. But now we've got to look at what Ross Douthat contends, which is America could use a good fight. What does he mean by this? America could use a good fight. Well, he says from the courts to Congress, the U.S. is more resilient than you think. To find out the details, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Consider abortion the issue that hangs over the looming confirmation battle, as it has hung over confirmation battles for decades. America doesn't have an abortion settlement. We have a permanent conflict that's been prevented from resolving itself because it's been artificially frozen from above. We did have a decade of normal political debate on the issue in the 1960s and early 1970s, with elections and lawmaking and shifting and unsettled coalitions. But Roe v. Wade put an end to that, locking us into a status quo in which the issue warps judicial politics, public opinion, barely changes, stuck at or around 20% pro-life, 30% pro-choice, 50% unsure, and the anti-abortion movement cycles through failed attempts after failed attempt to change an anti-democratic ruling by democratic means. That's Ross Douthat's contention in part of his article, America Could Use a Good Fight, from the U.S. courts to Congress. Our country is more resilient than you think. And I think, Lance, tell me if you have a different take. His general contention is that we need to be okay with getting back to real vigorous debate. And part of the problem is that what we think vigorous debate today isn't really vigorous debate. It's just shouting at one another and trying to get enough people from your side so that you get to do what you want and you don't have to listen at all to the other side. So I think his contention is less right about we've got to beat each other up as much as we need to be able to have these tough conversations, and we need to have them to work through them.
He brands himself in the article, quote here, as a conservative pessimist. But what I like about what he says is that too often we have governing by blocking instead of governing by throwing out new ideas and then dealing with the change. And he uses abortion. He also uses the healthcare crisis. And he points out that while he may not be a big supporter of the idea of healthcare for all, at least the Democrats are proposing something, whereas the Republicans are just saying, yeah, we're not going to do that. But there's nothing coming from them. And I think that, to me, kind of better pictures his debate in that he wants two different total views. Don't just say, you know what, I don't like what you do. Because he even says, while he feels he is more in the pro-life camp, if he were to lose, that's okay, because let's just move on and have an open debate about this and quit going back and forth. Then let's figure out what we are and let's go for it and move on and do some things. And I think that's the way I would describe him, is that he wants that debate of two different ideas. And then I think what's different is he's willing to live with the outcome. And that's where we see him offering up something that seems different today from both sides of the extreme. Neither one of the progressives or ultra conservatives, what we used to call the Tea Party, can deal with, quote, losing. If they don't get their way, then they're going to take their ball and go home. And I think that's our problem, is that what he's saying about a good fight, we need to just get in there and dig in and figure out, okay, this is what we are. This is what the majority says. And let's just move forward from this and let's deal with this. Let's not keep stopping progress. And I mean progress, not progressive, but let's not stop change just because we don't like the direction it's going. That's not fair. That if we're going to move forward, we have to have a good, honest debate, an argument, and then learn to accept the outcome.
All right, we're going to get Devon's reaction again here on something. I'm going to read you from the article. The best thing, Lance, according to Ross Douthat, right, in this article here, the best thing about Donald Trump's 2016 victory was the way it briefly seemed to smash these certainties, to prove that political consultants didn't know half of what they thought, to demonstrate that swing voters could still be discovered, and carefully calculated electoral college maps unmade. If Trump had built on this in his presidency, if he had done outreach and defied Republican orthodoxies and tried to be a majority-building president, then he would have proved many of his skeptics wrong. It just tells us that to the extent that America needs a reconfigured political system, a realigned politics, a transformed relationship between the branches of government, Trump has been the wrong refounder for the task.
I definitely don't have a lot to say about that. I don't think he's wrong in any way. Trump is a very strong public speaker, and especially when he's talking to the people that follow him. I think he definitely could have done a better job if he did reach out to these other groups and tried to build upon like a general idea from everyone of like how to fix things rather than, I just feel like we've been in such a stagnant place for so long as a country. These last 4 years, I don't feel like we're making the progress we should have.
Let me ask you something. I know this is going to seem unrelated, but it's important. Do you consider yourself pro-life or pro-choice?
I am pro-choice.
Okay. The gentleman that you just agreed with.
You're going to, I know I don't want to stop this, but you're going to bring up abortion? That's the one thing you don't ever want to talk about. But anyway, go ahead and ask your question. I just throwing that out to the audience. You just kind of floored Arnold in me. I mean, Arnold almost fell over in the chair
make a
next
point,
to me,
Lance,
because Justin brought up abortion. That's like the taboo subject for the state of us. So I guess we're not gonna talk about abortion. You're just gonna use it as a vehicle to describe two different human beings, right?
I think you're gonna like what I've got to point out. So Devon considers himself pro-choice. Okay, the person that you just said you agree with, just to be clear, is an opponent of abortion. And what I want to ask you is, do you disagree with him now?
No, I think people can differ in their opinions of what people should and shouldn't do with their bodies. I understand that, and I try to not get upset about it anymore. So I think that's all kind of where we need to be at a point. We need to understand each other's opinions, even if we don't agree. And
that, Lance, yes, my point in bringing this up really doesn't have anything to do with abortion itself. It has to do with the idea, right, that hopefully this show and our listeners out there understand the principle that we are trying to get people to accept and be okay with, is that one good point doesn't have to invalidate another point that you disagree with. It's okay for Devon to agree with Ross do that, or Lance and I too, on one subject and disagree on another. It doesn't have to be a zero-sum game, and that's what we keep letting ourselves be convinced of. And that's what has to stop, because going back to the first segment of the show, Lance, right? Tribalism. The reason tribalism exists is not because we are two tribes as a nation. There's a lot more than two tribes. We let ourselves be two tribes because we believe that we have to get on board with everything somebody we like says. And that's the message out there to people. It's okay to say, and I'll be one of the first ones to say it, right? That, for example, I support Biden. Does that mean that I like that everything Biden wants to do? No. Not at all, just like I will admit, as Lance and I have on the show over the years, when Trump does something good, we'll tell you that we thought it was a good thing for the country. And you can go back and check that. It doesn't have to be a zero-sum game, and it shouldn't be a zero-sum game. We should be able to acknowledge when somebody that we generally don't agree with does something that we're okay with.
Right. We used to call that, it doesn't have to be all or nothing, because, and I think here's the problem, is everybody wants to live in their world. They don't want to live in the United States. And the United States is all about differences. Differences of opinion, differences of lifestyle, differences of culture, food, clothing, language. And I'm not talking about this, and I'm okay with Spanish, French, English, all that kind of stuff. But there's a vernacular, right, of young people. I mean, here I am, the boomer, making fun of woke, because we used to have we have an intern who's not in the studio who always made fun of me as a boomer, and so I would use the Gen X, Gen Z terms. And they're like, well, how do you know that? Well, so there's different language. Okay. But why can't we just be Americans and push ahead and work for what we think is best for the country? And whatever the outcome is, we accept it and then work to change it without just saying, I'm not going to be a part of the system anymore. Since you're not doing what I want to do, I always call it the take your ball and go home theory. Why does everybody have to take their ball and go home if things don't turn out the way you want it? It still doesn't mean that we don't have a good country. It still doesn't mean that we don't have a great country. It just means that right now, the majority of the country doesn't agree with you. So toughen up a little bit, learn to live with it, and work to change. As the article points out, this is a country that banned alcohol for 13 years. We passed a constitutional amendment. And then 13 years later, we said, you know what? For a lot of different reasons, which we won't get into today, it's not working the way we wanted to. So we changed it. But nobody threatened to leave the country. Nobody said that America wasn't good anymore. Nobody said that we weren't a worthwhile nation. We tried something and we didn't like it and we changed it. But we all were still working as Americans. And that's what we need to get back to.
Obviously, I think hopefully our listeners know, if they've been tuning in for a while, that I'm on that page with Lance. Just a quick comment before we move on, Lance. You're talking about the take your ball and go home. These are not, and I don't want these to be synonymous. I think it is important that I point this out. Something that I've observed that I have vented on at home a little bit. I don't think I've mentioned it on the air yet. Is my fear and concern about cancel culture. You talk about the language, Lance, right? And some of these differences. Well, this is one of those things that goes on today, right? Where people cancel other people. Now, an important note here that I want to start out with before our Gen Z audience tunes out, because they're like, this is the greatest thing ever and we should cancel people. Before that happens, and I'm going to get canceled, before you do that, hear this bit, right? Do I think there are times in your life where you need to get somebody out of your life who is truly a toxic and bad person for you to be around? Yes. I believe there are times when you arrive at a point where you have to do that because it's what's best for your health. I also believe that it has become cool to cancel people, and that is bad. The times in my life where I have had to cut someone out of my life have been terrible experiences, okay? Unpleasant. They should not be fun. You shouldn't enjoy cutting somebody out of your life, even if they're a bad person, right? Because for me, that means what you're saying is you have given up hope. And I think what our show's about, I hope, is that hope should be maintained, because without it, there's definitely no chance of anything getting better. So what does the future look like? Is there still hope for the nation? Well, to find out, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
America could use a good fight, or America is in terrible danger. Those are what we talked about in the second and first segments of today's show, respectively. And Lance, I think the thing that comes to mind from these two is it's interesting. They're presented, right, as these opposing arguments, sort of. When you read them, what a notion, Lance, right? Taking time to read articles in full, as opposed to just excerpt snippets and hyperbole. But that's a different conversation. But when you take time to read these articles in full, and you take a little time to chew on it, as we have in this show, hopefully I would think what our listeners are starting to pull away, right, as you listen to the second and the first segment, and all of a sudden, yeah, there's a lot of good points in both of those, right? Things that we got to look out for. And maybe they're not actually opposing dynamics. Is it possible that America is in terrible danger, but America could also use a good fight? Is that possible, Lance? Because I read it and I think, yeah, right? I mean, yeah, there's some things in both of those I disagree with, but really on the whole, both of them I feel like are valid. Yes, I think we're facing some monumental problems. I also think that we could definitely benefit from some real, sincere debate, not shouting, not yelling, not me get my people in charge and have more people than you so that I can win. Not that crap, but actual discussion.
There are two articles. So obviously there are two schools of thought, and I think they both, as you point out, have some valid points to make. And that's what's cool to be alive, is we're going to see which one plays out. Right? And most likely you're talking about two extremes. So it'll be somewhere in the middle. As my moniker says, I'm a liberal redneck, right? But I'm not progressive.
You're an oxymoron.
But I am, but I think that's I think that's the American citizen. Normally, or we didn't used to anyway, pigeonhole ourselves with one person or one idea. We had a plethora of ideas and believed in things that people don't make sense. As I've said before, I like musicals and I drive my pickup truck, but I'm not a conservative. Like the guy says, a conservative pessimist. I tend to be more optimistic. Do I think we have some struggles right now? Do I think we have some major issues that are tearing the country apart? I do, but I hold hope when I study history that America has been here before and we've gone through some really rough times that are rougher than the ones we're going through. Not a lot, but there have been a few times that are rougher than what we're going through right now. And we always come out on the other side a better nation and a better people. That's just the way I am. I have to have that hope, or I don't think I could exist. I do think, though, that we are on the precipice of something that we haven't seen since I was a very young man, even younger than Devon. When I remember wearing my peace sign sweatshirt at the age of 12, and my grandma's generation wondering if that was something obscene or not. So it's been since that Vietnam War, racial 60s. I'm reading a book right now about the street riots in 68 over the Vietnam War and Nixon's, quote, silent majority and the hard hats versus the young people. And it's just like, I think we're in that case, but we came out of that. I mean, I went through Watergate and the Vietnam War, and America bounced back and became a stronger country because of it.
So the question then turns to our perhaps less optimistic, but maybe not, Gen Z. Does your hope match Lance's hope? One of the things that Lance, one of the last shows that we did with him, darn near caused me to tear up, because it did make me feel like we are failing young people today, in that I asked Bradley, the reason that you don't do more with politics is because, and his answer was basically along the lines, because I fear whether or not people will be okay with what I say. And what he was getting at is not that he's afraid to have opinions, but he's afraid of compromising friendships and relationships as a result of the opinions he has. And that, if that's the case for many, then we are failing, and we have a responsibility as a nation, regardless of age, to change that conversation. So I guess what I'm asking you, Devon, is, so what is your hope for the country, if any?
First, I would like to start with saying that I completely understand where Bradley was coming from when he said that, because there have been points in my life where I felt that way, and not until, within becoming a college student, and I never really fully felt that way again. I know that my opinions mattered and that they should be heard, but there's an appropriate way to go about it and to debate with people about. I don't think you should lose friendships over how you align yourself politically, or you have, let's just say, since I'm pro-choice, just because one of my friends would be pro-life doesn't mean that I would resent them for it or wish any ill will against them. I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with, is that difference of opinion, oh, you're an awful person because you don't think the way that I do. And I definitely think that is something we as Americans, as a planet, should not do. Now, relating into the hope of America, one big thing for me is universal health care. That's my big hope for America. I think that could help a lot.
Lance?
Yes, sir.
What do you think?
Which one?
What you got for us?
That's what makes America great, is we can have difference of opinion. I see both sides to the argument on healthcare. I haven't been sold yet on what plan is the best. But as I said, that's what we're about. Okay. I've talked to my daughters and they say, Dad, you're just way too optimistic. And I understand that, but that's okay. There's room under this umbrella for all of us. I guess I just we've joked and teased about moving and that kind of stuff, or leaving the country. My brother was doing that with me just last week. But I'm not. This is America. This is my home country. This is where I'm going to stay, for better or for worse. I'm here to the bitter end, and I'm going to try to make it a better place, whatever that I see that it is, and whatever I think that it is. And if my ideas get outvoted and I'm in the minority, okay, then that's going to happen. And I've got to continue to work to try to change it into what I think is right. And that's what makes it the United States of America. And that's what makes you a patriot. And that's what makes us all American citizens, is that we have the right to espouse our viewpoints as long as we're not physically harming other people. And we need to then be willing to accept the different viewpoints from others. And then let's go to the polls and vote, and let's decide which direction we're going to go. And if you don't like it, then we'll go from there.
I want to be real clear. I've tried to share this with listeners before, but I think it's such an important point to make. for me, it's always been there's two different lenses, right, that people view examples of patriotism. There's the lens of right, I have my party and I stand by my party and rah rah rah. You know, we're going to make America better, as opposed to the hard work of sticking around when you get outvoted, because that is where the true resilience comes in. And to me, that's the American spirit, is not when you're in the majority, but what you do when you're in the minority, and whether or not you stick around to keep trying to make the change. Because the reality is, folks, if none of us are willing to do the hard work, then we've already lost. If we're more interested in sticking with our party or sticking with our candidate or any of that, then it's over. And by the way, that's on both sides. That's those people that are ride or die Bernie or ride or die Trump. I'm sorry, but that's not how we fix things. No one person's going to do it. And if you believe that, you've got to do some self-reflection, because that is not what it's going to take to fix the country. It can't be done alone. That's the whole thing. I don't think there's anybody out there. There's not a single human that I feel on planet Earth is the person that you could assign and say, yeah, they'll just get it all fixed. It takes us all being committed to that change, or at least the majority of us. That's a huge part of what our country is based around, and not giving up when you're in the minority. A dissenting minority is part of the key to a healthy democracy. The minute that we give in and give up is the minute that we're finished. And so I hope, there's our hope, right? That the state of us continues to be that place, Lance, where we can do that. And that's why we had this conversation today in the first place, Lance, right? Is because as an organization, the company that's behind True Chat, all of our programs are pursuing this one common goal.
Well, that's right. Here at True Chat, our mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And when you're having that conversation, and just by the way, so just to use the presidential elections in my lifetime of voting, I've won 4 times and lost 6 times. So that's why I stick around and continue to support. But as we have that discussion, and you like that discussion, or you want to involve others, then you need to let them know how to listen to us. And you tell them, hey, you can find that show on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found. So there you go, folks. Get in, join the conversation, get others to join the conversation, and let's work to make America a better country. And that should be our goal.
The State of Us is released as a podcast Tuesdays and Thursdays by 4 a.m. in the Eastern Time Zone. Be sure to check it out on all those platforms Lance mentioned. We're also a syndicated radio program. You can find us on the weekends. Check your local talk station. If we're not there, call them. Tell them you want us to carry the State of Us, and hopefully they'll make it happen. Just the last note there, I can tell you, folks, at least from personal experience, there's been a lot of times in my life where and just recently I faced one of these decisions. Give up on something that I want and believe is important, or keep going, even though the going part is the difficult part, right? And more often than not, the keep going and the keep trying path has served me better, even though it has often been the more difficult path, emotionally, physically, what have you. It's often served the better path and the best end result. And I hope that we can all hold on to that.
And also, I will tell people from my experience, it's the most rewarding path.
For the State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to our recording producer, Devon McCain, editing producer, Bradley Bush. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.